الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Still sleeping. Please make sure you visit on the shoulder to shoulder when absent. الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر
الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا أما بعد. The Qur'an is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it pulls the blessings and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anyone who endeavors to get closer to the Qur'an in terms of reading it, understanding it, learning its applications, this person also draws the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why it's mentioned in a hadith that any group of people that get together, especially in the houses of Allah, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بُيُوتِ اللَّهِ, especially in the masajid, reading the Qur'an, يَقْرَؤُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُمْ, and understanding the Qur'an. So what happens? Sakina, tranquility, descends upon them. And this tranquility, it puts their fears, their worries to rest. It gives them a sense of comfort, and it gives them a sense of contentment in life in general, and specifically with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala envelops them from all sides, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the angels surround them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions these people in His court, in the court of angels. So these gatherings are extremely noble and elevated, and they are a source of comfort and mercy, and a source of bringing down the assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's always a good idea to sit with our hearts attentive towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we turn our hearts towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah azza wa jal responds by filling those hearts with what they need. That nur, that light of guidance, that sense of contentment, that comfort that comes with understanding, and all of the things that we need, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon us. So we sit to understand the book of Allah with our hearts and with our minds. Today we commence Surah An-Nazi'at, which is the second surah of the 30th juz. And this is another Makki surah. And a Makki surah is any surah that was revealed prior to migration, prior to the Prophet ﷺ migrating to Medina. Whether it was revealed in Makkah itself or elsewhere, for example, while the Prophet ﷺ was traveling to Medina, whether it was revealed in the limits of Makkah or somewhere outside, is not important. The marking point between a Makki surah and a Madani surah, and in some cases a Makki verse and a Madani verse, is that a Makki verse or surah is what was revealed before the Hijrah. So this surah consists of 46 verses, very short verses, as is characteristic of many Makki surahs. Short, extremely powerful, and very vivid verses. So let's take a look. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والنازعات غرقا. Naza'a means to pull, to yank, and even to tear sometimes. So the waw here indicates qasam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by those that pull, that yank, that jerk. Gharqan, ghariqa literally means to drown, either physically, such as in water, or figuratively, such as in one's problems, in one's worries. And ghariq is someone who is drowned. This term here is also used to explain the kind of force that is employed, that is used when doing a certain act. For example, the Arabs will say, نَزَعَ الْقَوْسِ فَأَغْرَقَ. This is when the archer pulls the string of the bow and keeps on pulling it until it cannot be pulled anymore. He has exhausted the limits of that bowstring. And he has exhausted the limit of that bow. So aghraqa means to apply one's full force in doing something. So now, an-nazi'ati gharqan, those that pull using their full force. So what is this? What are those that pull? The position of Abdullah ibn Abbas and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhuma, as well as a group of tabi'is, is that this refers to those angels that come to seize the soul of disobedient people. And as the hadiths elucidate, the process of the soul parting the body is either, it is by nature a difficult one, a painful one. Even the Prophet ﷺ felt the pangs of death, because we consist of a body and a soul. And this soul is embedded in every tissue, in every molecule and atom of our physical existence. It's infused inside this physical body. And that soul is what we call life. It is the life essence of the human being. And the soul is a permanent creation. It has a beginning, but it has no end. The body has a beginning, this physical body has a beginning and an end. The soul has a beginning, but it does not end, it continues. Now, death is simply the parting of this soul from this physical body. And because that soul is deeply infused and embedded into every single portion of our existence, it is a very difficult process. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this process easy for some people based on their previous life of good deeds, especially if a person dies in a good state. And for some people, this process becomes even more difficult. And in some narrations, it's described as if you were to take a wet ball of cotton and drag it across steel spikes or thorns, how the fibers of that cotton would stick to that steel, to those steel spikes, and how it would tear. So a very difficult process. As opposed to when an obedient person, when their soul departs, it's kind of like taking a piece of hair out of some dry flour. It just comes out very smoothly and quickly. So the angels that are deputed to seize the soul of that disobedient person, they do it in a very rough way. That entire process is a very gruesome and a very difficult process. In fact, the process itself is a punishment. The angel of death comes in the most despicable, disgusting, frightening form. And the person is so shocked when they see this appearance that just seeing something like that itself is a torment. And then it gets worse and worse and worse. The Qur'an describes it فكيف إذا توفتهم الملائكة يضربون وجوههم وأدبارهم. They come cursing this person and wishing them the worst, and they beat him from the front and beat him from behind, and they very roughly and crudely tear this person's soul out of their body. So these are those angels that have been deputed to such a task. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. They do it, they tear it out very roughly and with full force. وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. Nashata, its origins are in a well which is very shallow. That if you were to just throw in a bucket, the bucket would reach the bottom of the well, and it's very easy to pull water from it. And then this term was used for untying a knot. Untying a knot. So nashata is to untie a knot that you only need to pull one string. You know, sometimes you can tie a knot in such a way that if you just pull one string, the whole thing becomes untied and releases very quickly. This is nashata. So it's just gently tugging, gently pulling on that part of on that side of the string, and all of a sudden it becomes untied. So nashata al-iqal, to undo the knot of a rope, of a restraint. And this is the term that was used for the Prophet ﷺ when he was influenced by these people's spells and so on and so forth. When Allah SWT revealed the surahs of Al-Falaq and An-Nas, the Prophet ﷺ reciting them, and those knots started becoming untied until كَأَنَّمَا نُشِطَ مِنْ عِقَالٍ, as if he had been released from a tied up knot. So nashata means to release quickly, easily, without resistance. وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا, those that release very, very quickly and smoothly. So this is referring to the souls of the obedient people, people who died in a state of obedience. Their souls will be extracted very quickly and smoothly. And it's going to be much different than those who were on the other side. So these are angels. وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. Sabaha literally means to float. It's also used for swimming. And وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا, it's referring to the angels floating effortlessly through the atmosphere to carry out the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, moving very quickly, whether it's for the sake of coming and taking the souls from people, out of people, or taking them back to their abode, Sijjin or Illiyin. They do this effortlessly. They do this without any restrictions, any restraints. It's very easy for them. They're floating very quickly. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. And then there are those angels that whenever they're given an instruction, they rush towards it. Sabaqa, it means to race towards, to rush towards, or to beat someone else, to get there before someone else. This is sabaqa. Sabaq was actually the term used for a marker, such as a stick or a pole, that was used to mark the end of a race. That's the original meaning of sabaq. So it would be, that was referred to as qasbat al-sabaq, the pole that's used to mark the end line, the finish line of the race. So because everyone is rushing towards that and trying to beat everyone else, so the process itself was referred to as sabaq. So فَالسَّابِقَاتِ sabqa, those that are rushing forward to do what? To fulfill the command of Allah. Once the angels are given a direction, they do not delay. They do not delay, and they do not go about it in a lazy fashion. In fact, they carry it out immediately. They rush towards fulfilling that task. فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. Another attribute of the angels, according to the Tafsir of Ibn Abbas and Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhuma, is these are angels that have been given responsibilities by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they carry out those responsibilities in the sequence commanded by Allah. So Mudabbirat is from tadbir, which means to plan. But literally, dubur means something which comes after something. And the literal meaning of tadbir is to bring one thing after another. So this is the sequence that we follow when we're planning something. What comes first, what comes second, what comes third, in which order are we going to do things? How are we going to organize it? So this process of organization and planning is also referred to as tadbir. In other words, the angels do not go about their affairs in a haphazard manner. They do it in a very organized fashion. فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. Now, I mentioned that these are attributes of angels. There are some other opinions about what these are referring to, what these words are referring to. Some say that these are qualities of the stars, and the translation of nazi'at and nashitat, sabihat, sabiqat would be then translated in the context of stars. Those stars, in the case of naza'a, it's an inclination, it's to lean towards one side. So this is the movement now of the cosmos and the celestial bodies, their movement. And there are a few other opinions as well. Ibn Jarir al-Tabari rahmatullah alayhi, who is the premier mufassir from all the classic mufassirin, he says that we could leave this open, and this could refer to all of those things in the world that carry these attributes. So an-nazi'ati gharqa could refer to anything that has this pulling function and pulls with extreme force. And an-nashitati nashtan could refer to anything that is doing its task extremely quickly and without any restraint. As-sabihati sabhan could refer to anything that's floating about freely, including the bodies in the cosmos, including anything, including the things that are floating in the water. And fasabiqati sabqa can refer to anything that is rushing towards its goal and its objective. And al-mudabbirati amra could refer to anything that plans its affairs. It could even be the animals that plan and prepare. Animals, for example, they prepare for winter. Animals prepare for a certain season. They prepare for a certain kind of weather. They prepare for a certain type of condition. So it could refer to animals, human beings, or anything that fits this description. This is the preferred view of Ibn Jarir al-Tabari rahmatullah alayhi. But the view that I presented is the more common one, and it's coming from those Sahaba and a group of Tabi'is. This was an oath, and in the Quran, an oath is taken not to swear by the sacredness or sanctity of something. In fact, the rule for us is that we do not take an oath on the name of anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the rule for the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah Azza wa Jal also frequently in the Quran, He takes an oath or He swears by Himself. He swears upon Himself. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also swears by other things, not to indicate their sanctity, but to direct us towards their significance and importance. And it's not the sacredness of that thing itself, but it's the sacredness of the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by which those things are operating. So it's as if He is directing us to how intricate His instructions are, how beautiful His instructions are that are making these things carry out those functions. So in this case, yes, the angels are something of significance, absolutely. But more significant than that is the command of Allah that enables them, empowers them, and allows them to carry out all of these things. And that's really what is relevant. So what about it? Why is an oath being taken? It's obviously to emphasize something. It's obviously to alert the listener or the reader. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ. A day will come in which the rajifa will quake, will tremble. Rajafa yarjufu. Rajafa al-nahru or al-bahru. It means for something to shake uncontrollably. For something to shake uncontrollably. So you know how when the waters get choppy, it looks like the surface of the water is shaking, it's moving uncontrollably. So this is referring to that thing which will quake. What will quake? It is the earth that will quake, and this is referring to the after the first blowing of the horn, when the entire universe is going to start quaking. It's going to be one tremendous quake. So when the quaking one will quake, will shake, will tremble uncontrollably. تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ. And then it will be followed by tabi'a yatba'u, means to follow, to come after. Ar-radifa is the one that is right behind it. So radifa literally means to sit behind someone on, let's say, an animal. If you're sitting behind someone, you are their radif. You are sitting behind them, you're sitting after them. So this term is used for anything that follows, anything that comes afterwards. تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ. The one that follows shall come immediately after that, or sometime after that. How much time is that? The Prophet ﷺ was asked, how much is between the two blowings of the trumpet? The Prophet ﷺ, according to Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he said 40. So they said 40 days. He said, I won't comment on it. They said 40 months. He said, I won't comment. 40 years, I won't comment on it. He did not explain what it was, what those 40 was. So we don't know exactly what it is. It is a period of time that will take place, that will pass between the blowing of the first trumpet, the horn, and everything sort of falling apart, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recreating it at the blowing of the second blowing of the horn. This is the radifa. In one hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, while alerting his companions, and he said, wake up the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. جَاءَتِ الرَّاجِفَةُ تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ. Qiyamah is close. So that's actually what this is saying here. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةُ تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةُ. Qiyamah is coming, it's approaching. That day is not far away. What will happen? Now some glimpses, some specific images of that day. قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. Qulub is plural of qalb, heart. On that day, hearts on that day shall be wajifa. So wajif, awjafa, it means to make something speed, to make, literally meaning to make an animal gallop. To make an animal gallop very, very quickly. So wajifa is a heart that is palpitating. It is beating very, very quickly and uncontrollably. So we have, mashallah, we have our doctors here. What happens when a person is going through palpitations? They say, oh no, you have to control them. You have to do something. You have to administer this medication, rush them to the hospital. Because now the heart, it seems like it's gone out of control. It's beating faster than is sustainable by the body. So this is wajifa. So the palpitations of the hearts are going to be beating at such a speed that is uncontrollable. Absaruha khashi'a. And while this beating of the hearts is going to be a result of the extreme fear, the extreme state of panic that everyone is in, there will be some people whose eyes will be downcast. Absaruha, plural of basar, their eyes. Khashi'a means to bow down. Their eyes will be downcast. They'll be looking down. They will be unable to look up because of their shame. Shame and fear of the reckoning of that day will overwhelm them, and it will show. It will show on those people. Absaruha khashi'a. Those same people in this world are the ones who say, "Inna lamarduduna fil hafira." Here in dunya, while they don't have anything to fear immediately, There's no qiyamah taking place around them. Things are in order. Their life is in peace, in comfort. They have a lot of time to reflect and prepare. But instead of using the time in this world to reflect and to prepare for that day, they sit around asking questions, raising philosophical arguments, debates, objections, challenging all of these precepts and all of these things that we have been told are haqq. So they'll raise questions about it, and they'll spend a lot of time just questioning what has been said, questioning the text. أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ. Are we going to be returned back to an hafira? Hafara yahfiru, it literally means to dig. And hufra is a hole or a ditch in the ground. So hafira here, it could have one of two meanings. One is that it refers to a previous state. And it has been used in classical Arabic. Hafira has been used to denote previous state. Are we going to be restored to our previous state, meaning brought back to life? And the other meaning of hafira, literally from that which is dug, meaning the earth. In other words, while we are in our graves, are we going to be restored back to life? أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ إِلَى الْحَيَاةِ بَعْدَ أَنْ كُنَّا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Are we going to be restored back to life after being laid to rest in the ground? So they're questioning it. And to establish this, they say, أَإِذَا كُنَّا عِظَامًا نَخِرًا. After we have become heaps of decayed bones, decomposed bones. Nakhira, the literal meaning of nakhira yankharu, it means to be hollow. And nakhir is the sound that is created when air or wind passes through something hollow. So what kind of sound would the wind create if it were to pass through a hollow tree? A rustling or a whistling sound. So that's why the term nakhir is used for snoring in the Arabic language. Because as this air is being exhaled through the hollow of the nostrils, it's creating this noise. So bones that have become hollow, عِظَامًا نَخِرًا, bones that have decomposed, decayed, and become hollow. After we have become a heap of decayed bones, we're going to be restored back to our previous state. How is that? How is that possible? So the philosophical argument is, how can you undo death? How can you undo death and all that follows, such as the decomposing of the body, and such as the decomposing of all of the tissue, including the bone? And قالوا تلك إذا كرة خاسرة. They say, well, if we had to come back, if we were brought back to life, and if Jahannam is real, then that would be a return. Karra means to come back. So the example of somebody who was going forward and then they step back only to come forward again. This is karra. So to come back, to repeat. So karra is a return. That would be a return of khasira. Khasira yakhsaru, it means to lose, to suffer losses. That would be a return of great loss. Why? Because there would be nothing for us. Or they said this in a sarcastic way. It was their sarcasm. They were making fun of it. That, okay, in other words, we'd have to go through this whole thing again and then die all over again. This is their imagination. Interestingly, it is not difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring things back to life. And this theme was mentioned in Surah An-Naba as well. that if he could originate it, create it from nothingness, when it had no existence, then it's even easier for him to recreate it. It doesn't matter if it's died. If he can create it when it was nothing, he can create it when it was something and died and bring it back to life. It's even easier. And there's a good rule to keep in mind regarding science and Islamic beliefs. There are some people who will try to create a contradiction between what contemporary science says and what Islamic texts say. And they will say that what science is saying is absolute, it's definite, and what the Quran is saying, it's subject to interpretation. So take what science says and leave what the Quran is saying. This is one approach, one type of approach that people are using. Others will outright reject what the Quran or Hadith are saying when it comes into contradiction with science. And some people will use another approach where they will try to use Quran and Hadith as almost like texts of science, where from every point of the Quran and of the Sunnah, they will try to extract scientific theory, scientific basis, and scientific grounds for what is in the Quran and how the Quran is supporting science. The Quran is not a book of science, because science, which consists of theories, is always changing. Those things that were considered absolute and facts have been reviewed and changed so many times. And in recent examples, I can give you so many examples. I remember once according to the news station that brought him, he was the world's premier authority on the theory of evolution, Dr. So-and-so, and it was almost in the form of a news flash. And he had something very important to share, that we have been researching this for well over 100 years. We've spent a great deal of time and resources into researching the theory of evolution. Now we have reached our absolute conclusion, our final conclusion. And what is our final conclusion? That man did not evolve from ape. This is the world's premier authority saying this. And he said that yes, we found the remains of the Neanderthals. We found the remains of them, but there is nothing absolute, there is no proof to show that these two creations, these two species are linked. Because there's no link, in order to establish evolution, there must be an established link, but there is nothing to indicate that this became this over time. This morphed into this. And because of that, the theory is dead. So there is a concept that is still being preached, I would say, because this is now, you're just preaching. You're not teaching anymore. You're trying to preach something. You're trying to take people away from the truth that this world, this universe has an originator, and you're just trying to preach another theory to them to keep them away from God, as if you're trying to hide God from them. So that's an example of this thing being. Just recently, I read an article that we have known now for over 40 years that there was no Big Bang. Look at that. And these are those journals that are considered to be the authorities in the scientific community. And we've known this for well over 40 years, that there was no Big Bang. But now we're starting to talk about it. So now you'll see discussions on the internet, scientists and researchers saying that no, it wasn't really a Big Bang. Yes, there was a diffusion of matter, but the whole thing was that if it happened in the form of a Big Bang, then you know what, the world would continue, the universe would have continued expanding at that rate, because there's nothing to stop it. And if it had continued expanding at that rate, there was no way that this matter could be contained, and this universe could fall into this perfect rhythm and sync that it is in. So they'll go around talking about this over and over again. So the Quran is the word of Allah. It's absolute. Science is not absolute. And whether we're talking about the origin of the universe, we're talking about medical theory and pathology and practice, we're talking about any field, it's subject to further research and it will continue to evolve and continue to change. But what's in the Quran is haqq. Whether the science of our time supports it or opposes it, it doesn't really matter. The word of Allah is haqq. So using these kinds of philosophical or logical arguments to challenge the absolute truth, this is not something intelligent. In fact, the whole purpose of where does revelation fit in terms of the information process, in terms of the learning process of mankind? What role does revelation, divine revelation, actually play? So the tools that we have for learning begin with our five senses. We start learning about the world from our five senses. These are our physical senses. We see, we smell, we hear, we taste, we touch, and this is what gives us all of this information. And we're collecting this data through these senses. And that's our primary way of learning when we are infants. Gradually and slowly the intellect develops, and then we start understanding the intellectual basis for certain things. Oh, that's like that because of this reason. This happens because of that reason. When we were just using the senses, we were not able to find reasons and causes and all of those things. As the intellect develops, we begin to form logical bases and logical arguments for certain things. And we can tell when something doesn't make sense, when something doesn't add up. The five senses, as we know, are limited to just those things which can be sensed by these five. These five senses cannot help us understand abstract things. They cannot help us understand concepts, ideas, theories, suggestions, truths, untruths that are not rooted in a physical sensory experience. So the senses have their limit, and then comes the intellect, but the intellect also reaches its limit. Where does it reach the limit? It reaches the limit of those things which simply cannot be understood by the intellect, such as why are we here? This is a question that cannot be answered by sheer intellect. It cannot. And where will we go after we leave here? What's going to happen to us after? What exact things were we sent here to do? These questions cannot be answered by sheer intellect. So you see how we're progressing to a higher source of learning? We're progressing from the senses to the intellect. The intellect is a higher source of learning. But it has its ceiling. It has its peak. That's it. It doesn't go beyond that. That's where divine revelation comes in. The purpose of divine revelation is to explain to us things that we cannot understand by the senses or by the intellect. That's actually the role of divine revelation. So you see how counterproductive and counterintuitive it is to try to use logical arguments to counter the text of divine revelation, because this divine revelation only begins where this one ends. It's like a grade 5 student challenging a university mathematics professor on the reasoning behind algebra. The child is stuck on numbers and they're saying, well, you have all these formulas, they have all these letters. Letters are from the alphabet. Alphabet is for languages. Why are you bringing it into math? You don't add and subtract letters, you add and subtract numbers. This is an argument that a grade 5 student could pose to an expert of mathematics. Say, oh, why are there letters here? A, B, C, X, Y, what? That's letters, that's for languages, that's not for math. So what's happened here is that is the capacity of that child. And while they cannot understand at this point, because they just don't know enough, they cannot understand what algebra is all about. It doesn't mean that algebra is not founded. It doesn't mean that algebra is false or fake, or it's something just made up to confuse people, or that algebra is some kind of a conspiracy against mankind. It's not. It's just that this child's mind has not yet been trained to grasp it, and that's it. So trying to bring up logical arguments to counter the text is itself an illogical act. It's an illogical process. It's completely out of place. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers this question like this. فَإِنَّمَا هِيَ زَجْرَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ فَإِذَا هُمْ بِالسَّاهِرَةِ. Oh human being, do you think that this matter is that complicated? For me, for Allah Azza wa Jal, it's just one jolt. That's it. One blast. Zajara, it means to shake. And here, zajara is that one command from Allah. Kun, be, and it will become. That's all it is. You're getting lost in all of these discussions and arguments. It's none of that. For Allah, it's just one command. Allah will send this zajara. It could be referring to the command of Allah to be, or it could be the command of Allah that is announced by the angels. Rise. And that's it. فَإِذَا هُمْ بِالسَّاهِرَةِ. The next thing they know, they will be standing in that field of Hashr. That's all there is to it. Now you may understand it, you may not understand it. It doesn't really matter. That is what is going to happen. And the one who did all of this is going to do that as well. فَإِذَا هُمْ بِالسَّاهِرَةِ. Now, an example then is given of someone who continued to challenge this precept and doubt it and got lost in that process, and reminders came and the person did not take those reminders. And this is given in the form of a summary of the story of Musa alayhi salam. The story of Musa alayhi salam is brought here to demonstrate that this is the reality of man. This is what many men end up doing with their lives. Hal ataka hadithu Musa. Has the story of Musa come to you? Hadith means talk, the talk of Musa, the story of Musa. Now, this question is not for interrogation, but this question is to establish that indeed the story of Musa alayhi salam is well known to you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Just like when you want to direct someone's attention to something, sometimes you pose it in the form of a question. Oh, do you know where the musalla is? When you know that the person knows where it is. Yeah, I'll meet you there. So these questions are actually not for the sake of asking a question, but for the sake of shifting the person's mind entirely to that topic. And the question has that power. Hal ataka hadithu Musa. In other words, let's think about the story of Musa alayhi salam for a minute. What happened? إِذْ نَادَاهُ رَبُّهُ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ طُوَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him prophethood. He granted him prophethood. We're not going to go into the whole story here, because this is the most frequently mentioned story in the whole Quran, the story of Musa alayhi salam. The most frequently mentioned story. You'll find it in virtually every single juz of the Quran. Almost every juz has the story of Musa alayhi salam. So here the Quran summarizes it, so we're also just going to summarize it. So when his Lord called him, إِذْ نَادَاهُ رَبُّهُ, when his Lord called him, بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ, at the sacred valley of Tuwa. At the sacred valley of Tuwa. So this is Musa alayhi salam, after spending 8 or 10 years in Madian, he's going back towards Egypt. And on his way is this vast valley of Tuwa. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it a sacred valley. Why is it sacred? We'll talk about that at another time. We want to stay on the summarized version of the story right now. What did his Lord call him? Of course, after giving him prophethood and after giving him those teachings and all of those things that are mentioned. Idhab ila Fir'aun. Go to Fir'aun. Go towards Fir'aun. Innahu tagha. This word tagha was brought up in Surah An-Naba. It means to break free of limits, to breach the limits. Innahu tagha. He has rebelled. he has gone out of his limits. And of course, he did that in every way possible. He declared his own, he declared not only his own kingdom, but he declared to be God. He declared to be the highest God. And he killed and slaughtered the sons of Bani Israel in the thousands or in the hundreds of thousands. But, O Musa, when you go to him, your tone is not going to be the tone of someone who is there to warn him, to chastise him, to condemn him. فَقُلْ, your message is going to be هَلْ لَكَ إِلَىٰ أَن تَزَكَّى. Are you interested? هَلْ لَكَ. Is it for you? Is it in your interest? Is it in your care that you find a path towards, or you start a process towards an tazakka, an tatazakka, that you become refined, you become pure? Are you interested in this? Is this something that would interest you? Now look at the tone. Look how gentle that tone is. And the Quran mentions this more clearly in another place where Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam are told, قُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَى. When you speak to him, speak in a very gentle tone. In a very gentle tone. Perhaps it may allow him to reflect. Perhaps it may bring some fear into his heart. Keep your tone gentle. So the tone of Musa alayhi salam was gentle. Sometimes our tone, when we're reminding someone or correcting someone, it becomes very harsh. And it's natural for us to sometimes, take on a harder or a harsher tone. But one thing to remember is that we are not greater than Musa alayhi salam, and the person we're speaking to is not worse than Fir'aun. So we should try to give our reminders in as gentle a way as possible. At the very least. And by the way, it's not something unnatural to be upset or angry when you see something wrong happening. When you see someone breaking the rules, when you see someone disobeying you or disobeying Allah or disobeying His Rasul or breaking a major or serious rule, it's natural for anger to settle in. However, when we are going to remind someone or talk to them and make them understand, then this is not a part of the chastisement process. This is a part of the reminder process. And the reminder needs to be gentle. At the very least, the implication should not be that of insulting someone. It should not be done in an insulting way. So Allah is telling him, ask him if he's interested in purifying himself. Ask him if he's interested in improving, tatazakka, improving. وَأَهْدِيَكَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَتَخْشَى. And are you interested in me helping you, me guiding you towards your Lord? Up to that point, he was the Lord in his mind, and that's what he was enforcing. He is the ultimate authority. No, you also have a Lord. If you like, I can lead you towards him. I can guide you towards him. فَتَخْشَى. You will recognize him. And once you recognize him, you will have awe of his authority. That's what the word khashya means. So one is khawf, which means fear. Fear of anything is khawf. And khashya is awe. So there's a difference between being afraid and being awed by someone or something. You're awed because of the grandeur of something, the greatness of something. We stand in salat, not in fear. We stand in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So awe is something that can only occur in our heart if we know what that thing is. If we know what it is. So when the ma'rifah, when the recognition of Allah Azza wa Jal settles into someone's heart, then their heart is also filled with awe for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what khashiyah is. That's why the Quran says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. It's the people of ilm that actually have the khashiyah, because they have the understanding of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyways, fatakhsha. So then the Quran, it fast forwards from that point where Allah gave him those directives to the point where Musa alayhi salam actually went, conveyed his message. Pharaoh mocked him and challenged him, and a long discussion took place. And Musa alayhi salam said, what if I give you proof that I am in fact from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have been sent by Allah? Pharaoh said, okay, show me your proof. So there were two signs that Musa alayhi salam showed him immediately. One was that he put his hand underneath his arm and he took it out, and it was shining white, it was radiant and giving off this bright shining light. And the second was that he threw his stick, that staff of his, and that staff of his became a massive snake. A massive one. The Quran uses various words to describe it. It describes it as thu'ban, فَإِذَا هِيَ ثُعْبَانٌ مُبِينٌ, a big massive serpent. حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى, it was this snake that was running, and كَأَنَّهَا جَانٌ, and it was moving with the speed of a young snake. And anyone who knows about snakes knows that the baby snakes are extremely, extremely fast. So its speed, its size, and its ferociousness are described in the Quran. So when he threw his staff, it became this massive, frightening serpent right in front of Pharaoh. But Pharaoh had decided not to believe, irrespective of what signs were brought to him. He said, this is magic. فَكَذَّبَ وَعَصَى. He refuted it. كَذَّبَ. كَذَّبَ means to lie. كَذَّبَ means to say that something is a lie. He said, this is a lie. What you're saying is a lie. You are a liar. وَعَصَى. He disobeyed Musa alayhi salam's suggestion. He disobeyed the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He disobeyed. ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ يَسْعَى. And then he turned away from Musa alayhi salam. Adbara, he completely pushed him away. He turned away. Yas'a, he started his own campaign. And the Quran gives details of that campaign. Gathers all his people and says, look, he's a magician. What should we do? Okay, gather all the magicians. He created this, he put together this propaganda machine that started undoing the work, or tried to undo the work of Musa alayhi salam. Basically, they turned him into a pariah. They had their media at that time, which was basically interactive social media, get word of mouth, let people know, start talking about it, create a stigma around this person, make people doubt him, make people hate him, and spread all kinds of bad news about him. All of that stuff. Then the same tactics are used today, using the same or different means. So Yas'a, he started this whole effort to oppose Musa alayhi salam. And as a part of that, he said, you know what, the only way this is going to work is if I announce with clarity that, oh people, actually I'm your God. I am the God of gods. That's the only way this is going to work, because as long as I am a God, people will say, no, there are others as well. So فَحَشَرَ فَنَادَى, he started gathering people, he started collecting people, and in the midst of all of the people, openly, publicly, he announced, أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى, I am your highest Lord. So, oh people, whatever gods you may have heard about, or you may have worshipped, you should know that I am on top of all of them. I am your supreme Lord. So what happened? فَأَخَذَهُ اللَّهُ نَكَالَ الْآخِرَةِ وَالْأُولَى. أَخَذَ, Allah grabbed him, grasped him. Nakal means punishment. It means something which causes pain. Allah grasped him nakal al-akhirati wal-ula, with the pain of akhirah and the pain of this dunya. Someone might ask that how did he have to suffer the pain of this dunya? So it means a few things. First of all, the Quran gives details of all of the inflictions that befell Fir'aun and his people right there in the life of Musa alayhi salam, while Musa alayhi salam was there. Floods and storms came and destroyed everything of theirs. And they had this phenomenon of blood where every source of potable water, of drinkable water, would become blood the moment they poured it into their vessels. The moment they took it to drink, it would turn into blood. And they had these problems. They were inflicted by these pests, al-qummal, such as these ticks or these bed bugs that got into everything and made their life. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced anything like that, but if you've ever experienced a scourge of bed bugs, it's one of the most terrible things because you have absolutely no peace. And they're so hard to find, they're so hard to kill. So this was one of it was sent as a scourge, as a punishment upon them. And al-dafadi', frogs and toads everywhere, in everything, in all their food. They were just frogs and toads would show up. And like this, many different signs came. So this became a source of extreme torment and frustration for Fir'aun. And every single time he had to go back to Musa alayhi salam, Ya ayyuha sahir, O sorcerer, ud'u lana rabbak. Ask Allah to remove this problem, remove this. So they kept coming back to Musa alayhi salam to remove the problem. Musa alayhi salam would ask Allah, oh Allah, remove this problem. Maybe they will get hidayat, maybe they'll be guided. Again, they would go right back to the same thing. So this happened over and over again, but it became a source of extreme punishment for Fir'aun in dunya. Another aspect of the punishment of Fir'aun in dunya is the fact that he was drowned with all his armies, and he had to see that happening in front of his own eyes. That itself is a huge torment. And another torment that it's not in this phase of dunya, but it does take place before the day of judgment, is the punishment of the grave. النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. So the punishment of the qabr, the punishment in barzakh, that they are going to be tormented with morning and evening, aside from the torment of akhirah. So فأخذه الله نكال الآخرة والأولى إن في ذلك لعبرة لمن يخشى. Verily in this is a ibrah. عبر يعبر, it literally means to cross, such as to cross a river, to cross over a bridge, to cross over a path. عبر يعبر. اعتبار means to take something that you know and use it to get to information that is beyond that. So to cross over from here to here. To cross over from one level of understanding to another level of understanding. In other words, to derive conclusions. To derive conclusions from information that we have been provided. This is called i'tibar. And when we do that, the thing that we derive is called ibrah, a lesson. Inna fi dhalika la ibrah. Verily in this is a great lesson. La ibrah. Verily in this, without doubt, is a great lesson. Liman yakhsha, for anyone who has some awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their heart. So what is the lesson for us? Never reject the divine revelation based on our own understandings and feeble logical arguments. Next lesson is always stay within the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Other lesson is never give yourself so much importance that you feel you can transgress. And never think that you are unrestrained, that there's nothing that can stop you, that you are unstoppable, you are unbeatable. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command always wins. It supersedes everything and everyone. And the other thing is that whenever we have an opportunity of tazkiyah, whenever we have an opportunity to purify ourselves, to rectify ourselves, we should never walk away from that. That was the offer of Musa alayhi salam. هَلْ لَكَ إِلَىٰ أَن تَزَكَّى. Would you like to purify yourself? He said, I'm not interested. That was the source of problems. So we learn that tarkut tazkiyah, to walk away from tazkiyah, to walk away from purifying, the process that purifies us, rectifies us, corrects us, fixes us, trains us to walk away from that process is the biggest blunder a person can make. And the opposite of that is that we run towards those things that purify us, those things that help us, those things that rectify us, even though they might not be pleasant at the time. You know the literal meaning of tazkiyah, zaka yasku, it means for something to be heated to an extreme temperature. And zakka yuzakki, it means to heat something to an extreme temperature, such as what is done with gold. When we want to purify it, we heat it to these extreme temperatures. And only when it bubbles and boils at a certain temperature do the other alloys separate. That's the literal meaning of tazkiyah. In other words, you have to take yourself to a certain level of discomfort and even hardship, and that's when your bad habits start going. It wasn't just Fir'aun who needs tazkiyah. Everyone needs tazkiyah. But tazkiyah can be a very bitter and a very stringent process. You have to be prepared for that process if you want to benefit from the fruits of it. If you want to benefit from everything that you will get after that. And this is something that is understood by even non-Muslims. They know that there is a higher self. There is the potential to be a better person. There is the potential to be a more mindful person, a more caring person, a more unselfish person, and all of those things. And they also know that this does not come easily. You have to really struggle and strive. Everyone can understand it. And as Muslims, that is an ongoing aspect of our deen. It's an ongoing aspect of our deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to benefit from these lessons. Inshallah, we will complete this surah in upcoming weeks, inshallah, over the next week or so. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Alhamdulillah.